All right. Greetings, Dr. Paula Deloge. This is the PESTEL Analysis for Egypt. Group members Alicia LaCour, Maya Page, Lanishan Lagarde, Leslie Thornton, and Christopher Wright. So for the first section of the PESTEL analysis is the political environment. So for the first one is leadership. Is there any instability in the leadership in the selected country? So Egypt leadership style consists of a government that is both transformational as well as transactional styles. The main government in the system of the government are their social norms. That's basically how they follow everything. Instability in the government come from two main issues: military involvement as well as the Islamic push in power. So being that most of their laws and everything form from the social norms is how everything is influenced, is based off a lot of their religion. So religion is the biggest sector. They have Muslims takes over a vast majority of the country, as well as acute instability in Egypt will harm Washington's as the United States capacity and the operate effective in Egypt as well as the Middle East. Whether it is the U.S. Navy seeking short notice transition for warships through the Suez Canal, the White House seeking diplomatic support and brokering peace between the Israelites and the Palestinians, or the intelligence community in need of cooperation for the counterterrorism issues. There are two plausible scenarios in the instability in Egypt. Military intervention resulting in a consistent secession. So the military creates a lot of issues in the leadership because they feel as if they overrule everything else. And the Islamic push for political power goes alongside with the religion aspect, how the religion is the main thing that's going on there. So they feel as if since we're so big here, we should be over everything. Could you go back to the first slide for me? There we go. So the second thing is nationalism. So the question was, what is the sentiment of the citizens in the country regarding nationalism? How would this affect the buying behavior of the citizens for American companies looking to enter the region? So based off my research, Egyptian citizens aren't really fond of the nationalistic ideas that are evident in their society based off the involvement from their typical stereotypical norms that are in Egypt. So being brought up, you were raised one way because that's all you saw. However, the more you grow up, the more you evolve and learn other things. So one of the things that I can really give an example for is where the retaliation from the Egyptian military, as well as cross beliefs, create a bigger problem in Egypt. And how can it affect new business relations within the country? So an example I found was on October 9th, 2011, Egyptian state media had a protest. There was a big old protest going on. About 27 people were killed. And of those 27 people, 2 were sentenced to 2 years in prison for charges or stealing weapons from the armed forces, whereas there has 3 soldiers that were sentenced for 2 to 3 years in prison for involuntary manslaughter. So the national state and even the Orthodox Church asks everyone to forgive and forget of this situation for the national unity and healing. So when it comes to the nationalist belief, nationalists can become very ignorant to the point of self-deception. Nationalists respond very violently to any perceived threat from another group because they realize that they are serving a large entity which provides them with a sense of security and they're obligated to defend it. So basically that means they're stuck in their ways. So you really can't influence them to believe anything else. And living in a country that's solely based off nationalism is kind of hard to bring in new ideas. Therefore, if any American-based company wishes to branch off and create a location in Egypt, the nationalistic ideas would affect their business based solely off the fact of what the company represents. If it doesn't fall in line with the norms of the Egyptians, then that would create more problems. That would not let the company branch off or expand bigger than what they already are. Could you go to the next slide for me? So the next point is on violence, terrorism, and war. So how often does violence, terrorism, and war occur in the country? How does this affect supply chain strategies for the US-based companies? Egypt will be considered a medium threat location due to crime. Most of their crime consists of simple things like thieves are mainly. So Egypt is at level 2, indicating travelers should exercise increased caution due to terrorism. They basically say do not travel the Sunan Peninsula except for the desert or the airway. Do not go in the Western Desert due to terrorism or the Egyptian border areas due to military zones. The military is a really big threat for most citizens or in tourists in Egypt, but just because of their beliefs and they don't align up with a lot of the people that come there. As an American company overview, their supply chain strategy should be taken into consideration in their location. The location depends a lot upon everything, just because the transportation logistics, that's one of the main areas in supply chain. And in Egypt, most of the crime does happen on the road. So it's if you're having your location somewhere high in crime, you will not have a lot of people coming in. It's just not going to work out great for the company overall. So for corruption, Egypt is ranked 117 out of 80 with a 33 score out of 100 on the index rater for basically the corruption. So the corruption is ranked out of 100 being very clean and 0 being highly corrupt. So Egypt is a very high corrupt country in a sense, you say. Most of their corruption comes from bribery, embezzlement, tampering with official documents, exportation, a poor legal frame, widespread culture of nepotism, favoritism, render businesses in the country relying on a strong connection operate. So the corruption mainly happens in the Egyptian government. There aren't really companies that you hear about or you see in the news that had shut down due to corruption within. So it's kind of like if you're bringing in a foreign country, you just need to know that the officials that you're bringing in are on the right track, that they aren't going to do anything to basically harm your company. It's just all about you and what you believe in and who you bring in. So, but with everything in the corruption, Egyptian has some codes. Like they have the Penal Code Article 103. Any public official, civil servant who acts himself for a third party or accepts or takes a promise or donation in any other form of duties of his position shall be considered a bribe taker, permanent hard labor, and a fine of less than 1,000 pounds or not exceeding the donation or the promise he was given. So basically, they have ways to deal with corruption as in the government standpoint, but more on the business standpoint, they don't really have much because the embezzlement is not really happening there. Now I'll be passing it on to Maya.
Thank you. Now, since since the pandemic has happened, the economic stability of Egypt has been in question. So I've tended to do research to see how the economic stability was in Egypt. So in Egypt, the economic growing and resilient, and inflation has fallen over the past 5 to 10 years. Now, with everything going on, you would think that the economic growth wouldn't be as high, but with Egypt, it was a different story. There's actually been positive growth despite of the global pandemic by 3.6%. It was 5.6% in 2019, but it was growing at a slower rate. But due to Egypt having such high domestic consumption, they didn't have a recession. So in previous presentations that we've done, we've seen that Egypt growing rate when it came down to economic growth, even during the global pandemic, because they prepared for the pandemic without actually knowing that they were preparing for it. So now that we know what the economic stability is like in Egypt, we can go on down to job growth, because the economic stability in Egypt can have an effect on what their job growth is like. So with now, Egypt's main priority is looking to create more jobs, and they're focusing mainly on the youth, because when I did research, statistics shows that a lot of the people in Egypt are of older age. Looking to open up jobs for people of older age, are really looking for their youth. And with other research, we see that the private sector is the main source of jobs for Egypt. And instead of focusing mainly on a certain part of labor within that private sector, they're only looking for they're only looking to expand and create more meaningful jobs that'll help enhance their daily life of their citizens. Because Egypt is Egypt is the type of country that likes to actually take care of their citizens. So anything that'll increase daily life they're going for, which makes that job creation a big priority for them. Next slide, please. Now we're going to look at education. So how is education viewed in Egypt? Education is viewed as a vital part in Egypt because in Egypt, they believe that education is vital to the individual development of that person. So we all know that in America, school tuition isn't really that free, but in Egypt, school tuition is free on all levels. And over were enrolled, which was topping the past number of 14 million students being enrolled back then. So in Egypt, they have three stages of education. So you have the basic level education, which is ages 4 through 14, where you do primary school and then you do some more school for like 5 years after that. Then that's when you go into secondary education, which is for the ages 14 to 17. Then you have the tertiary level of education, which is mainly college students. So let's go down to the income of the Egyptians. So the pandemic has happened. A lot of the income has lessened. Which means that, excuse me, which means that the spending of the citizens for themselves has lessened also. So spending has become less due to the economic slowdown in the past. But in Egypt, the citizens believe that there's quality over affordability, meaning they would rather have something of great quality for a high price than something of low quality for a low price. And now Egyptians, they've been tracking their spending, and we found that the spending, and an example of a selective spending that they have that has lessened is automated purchases. They aren't purchasing big cars anymore. They aren't purchasing unnecessary things anymore. Their spending has come in result of the economic situation that they've been going through before the pandemic, since the pandemic, and even now. Next slide, please. And I'll be passing it on to my colleague, Lanishan.
I will focus on the socio-cultural environment. First off, family in Egypt, men are considered to be the head of the household. There are times when women can work, but that decision is usually left up to their spouse. For example, in an article I read, how a man named Ahmed, who lives in Egypt's capital, Cairo, stated he allows his wife to work. At first, I insisted she stay at home, but she was able to raise kids and care for the house and still have time to work. He stated that in the article. As there are militants who make Egypt an unsafe place for civilians as well as tourists. They vow to target any groups they feel are guilty of idolatry and heretical innovation of religion. There was an article that I read where there was a mosque killing of 305 worshipers and 128 were injured. For the schooling, Egypt has 386. They have 38,666 students that are studying abroad in the Middle East region. Egypt has the most extensive education system with more than 60,000 schools. They have taken the COVID-19 crisis and used it as an opportunity to speed up educational reforms in areas of assessment, technology, financing, and parental involvement. As far as the media is fairly used in Egypt, they reported a number of internet users that have increased by 9.8 million, which is 22% from 2019 to 2020. In total, there were 54 million estimated media users in Egypt, out of the population of 104,124,440 people, with 51.63% of them being 24 years and under. Continue, we'll take a look at Hofstede's cultural dimensions. Number one, we have individualism versus collectivism, and that focuses on acting independently versus interdependently. So Egypt had a 25% individualism ranking, meaning that they are considered a collectivist society. For example, the member groups is what they like to call it, includes their family, extended family, and extended relations. And the loyalty and commitment is equal in all of these groups. So what that basically means is that in Egypt, they have a more broad sense of who they consider to be loyal to, rather than someone just deciding, okay, my close family and friends, that's who I'll be dedicated and committed to. They Loyalty runs big in Egypt. So they have a wider range of who they consider to be special to them in a sense. Power Egypt scores high on this dimension with a 70. For example, people in power or with wealth tend to distance themselves from the average citizen. They create a line of inequality, and instead of this being opposed by the citizens of Egypt, they accept it. They take pride in the rules and the regulations and laws without any backlash or problems. Uncertainty avoidance. Egypt scores an 80 on this dimension, and therefore has a high preference for avoiding uncertainty, pull out the unpredictable. They take pride in their very strict rules, regulations, and laws, especially in a business aspect. You won't have to worry about someone getting out of line or having a problem with respecting the authority that is over them. Communication styles and management, low context versus high context culture. Egypt has a high context culture. They have an indirect method of communication. They avoid controversy and they don't want to offend or step on anyone's toes. So they'll be more conservative in how they communicate and what they choose to say to each other.
Okay, so we're now going to look at the technological environment in Egypt. So Egypt's technological infrastructure allows for them to have a grid that helps them to give a vast majority of their population electricity services. The grid is interconnected between Libya and Jordan through a 200 and 400 kV. And in the recent years, Egypt has been working to upgrade this initial grid and move into what they call a smart grid, which will support their digital transformation. And what this grid is basically just an eco-friendly grid that has like renewable resources. So they plan to grow this up to 42%. The first thing that I'll look at is product strategy. And the first article that I have explains how Egypt will be now creating their own E70 electrical car, moving them into having green alternatives for travel. They have now discovered a new gas field, and it's called Zor gas. And this is basically helping them move from petroleum into natural gas. And Egypt is working to become a self-sufficient country in the next 2 years, and they feel that this will help them do that by having to cut back on connecting with people who provide them with gas. The next article is from CNBC. Explains how Egypt would like to build an Apple hub in Egypt directly instead of using third-party sellers, and they would like to do this to help their educational reform. So Egypt does have access to Apple products, but they are sold to them through third-party people. So they hike up the prices compared to other Middle Eastern countries surrounding them. They pay about 50% more than those countries. So they are upset with Apple about this, and they have a 60-day letter just basically saying that they have 60 days to fix the issue with them because they feel that it's based off of unfair treatment. The Prime Minister, Mr. Mustafa, is the one who sent this letter out, and they did this basically when their economy got better. They did this to help with jobs and, like I said, help with their educational reform because they have a lot of schools out there, so they can connect with Apple in that way by just doing like that. The next thing is promotion strategy. Egypt has created a digital attache program. This will help U.S. companies capitalize on the country as they emerge as the leading digital hub for the Middle East and North Africa. So this digital program is just to help U.S. markets connect with Egypt through a wholesale thing. So Egypt wants to just do a lot of wholesale selling for foreign countries. This helps them because technical people who they call their digital trade officers who actually work in the US in their headquarters. And these people just help them with like policy changes, or if they just have any type of problems with getting connected with Egypt. And the countries that are selected for this program so far are Egypt, of course, Brazil, China, India, Japan, and some other ones. This is based off of their stakeholder feedback. The next article for promotion strategy talks about how Egypt held a royal parade where over 20 mummies are now being transported from their initial home at the Egyptian Museum, and they're now going to be placed in a new high-tech home or museum. This museum is called the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization, and they're moving them here to basically help with their tourism. Tourism did decline in Egypt recently, so they have been looking for ways to bring that back up, and they feel that this will be one of the three museums that they have a part of this. And the thing that makes this museum different is that here it actually gives the visitors an experience of actually being inside the tombstone. So the pharaohs that are going to be moved into that museum, they lived in a era called the New Kingdom. So this museum is basically just going to replicate that, which is like an underground kind of experience that had a lot of secret gateways. And next slide. So the technological environment continue is going to talk about their distribution and supply chain. So my next article just talks about, with the advancement of technology, Egypt has now been able to decrease the cost of oil. It usually went for like $100, and because it was so high, this was causing inflation in their company, because as the prices increase, so will inflation, and consumption will slow down. So they have now found a way to get it down to $60. And they found this by being a part of the OPEC, which is the Organization for Petroleum Exporting. So this is connected with a lot of different countries throughout who are very heavily influenced in selling oil, and Russia is also. So they have came to the agreement on how to just cut down on their oil. They're going to cut down on about 1.2 million barrels a day, and that is how they're going to be able to get it down to $60. And because of them doing this, they have created new relationships with countries and have lost some with others. Their neighbors usually make around like 2 to 1 million barrels of oil a day, and Egypt is only making 670,000 barrels a day. So they just want to be able to beat their competition, because as I said before, Egypt is the #1 oil hub, so they just want to be on top. The next thing is that Egypt has been selling for foreign firms through their wholesale and retail distribution. To help the legitimacy and effectiveness, these foreign countries help their Egyptian staff through training with their marketing specialists and technical support staff. So again, Egypt is connecting with these foreign countries to help them with wholesale and retail distribution. They are connecting with a lot of overseas suppliers. They have realized that when they do connect with local agents, they tend to hike up the price when it comes to distributing out these things and exporting them out. So they like to stick with overseas people. And again, they have people who help them, like their technical support staff, with these things. They are, again, in the US. So they are easy for people to get in contact with. And these people who work for them, they have certain requirements that you have to have in order to be this employee, be an Egyptian, and the partners cannot form separate companies through or Egypt itself and its partners cannot form separate companies outside of this because they will now be acting as a separate importer. So the company is strict on that. They do want people to only do it with their one business. And now I'll be passing it to my colleague.
So what we have here, we're looking at the climate and the topography for Egypt. So just little information about Egypt's climate. Egypt's climate is a semi-desert, characterized by high dry summers. They have moderate winters. They have very little rainfall, and they have very streams. Um, Egypt is basically dominated by the Nile for about 750 miles. It's like a dry tropical region, so it's really kind of hot there. But getting into like would it affect, like how would it affect, whether or not, if you will, um, for the first example I have here, it would negatively affect the market entry. So this first article we have is the We Form article. So it just talks about change presents risks with temperatures rising. Egypt could lose 30% of its food production. With it being so hot, I'm pretty sure that that really affects their food production. But it also says Egypt sees a dam as essential threats that could disseminate, disseminate the farming and damage power supplies. So more than 80% of its water is used for agriculture. Most of the water that they use there, they do a lot of different things, such as they might have like water mills, or they might have different projects that they do that requires a lot of water. Getting into my next example, I have article CNBC. It talks about a cargo container ship that it was stuck in the middle of the ocean, and this was like one of the largest that they had in the world, and it was tipped sideways. So being tipped sideways, it like blocked traffic in Egypt's canal. And then the Egypt forecaster blamed the strong winds on the reason why it was tipped over. I feel like that would negatively affect it because that ship was carrying a lot of products and things that Egypt needed. And when it was at a standstill, nothing could be sold. It was just sitting in the middle of the ocean waiting for it to meet the port. So going down, we have global to affect Egypt global success. I would say no, because we all know like the global success has something to do with how good Egypt is doing. So on the We Forum, it says in the Western Desert of South Cario, one of the world's largest and most ambitious solar energy projects is underway. That to me would be global success because that is something that they're working on. And it says it's one of the largest and the most ambitious. And it's supposed to be like the best electricity like producer that they have. And it's gonna give a lot of power to a lot of homes. Another for global success would be, it would also be from We Forum. The Egyptian desert is set to host the African continent first vertical forest. So when I did my research, looking at the vertical forest, it was just like homes, like in a vertical type of platform. That's how they had it set up. But it was very like, I mean, a lot of leaves, a lot of flowers. It was like a forest, but they just had a lot of things there for people to do. But so moving on to the product strategies, we also have would it affect the product strategies? I put here it would, because Egypt has not produced anything. Well, most of the things that they have the past 3 years, like due to the temperature levels, it is really hard for the farmers to achieve their goals and missions. So with it being hot weather or just rainy all the time, or like I said, it's very little winter. So it's just not like good over there. But getting down to the next one, Egypt is mainly concerned with drinking purifications and desolation and distribution. Talking about that is just they have a lot of water in Egypt, so a lot of the water is probably contaminated, or it's just like I said, it's just hard to get a hold of it. But they have some of the, like another example would be just the farmers are not able to produce because of the water crisis. So getting down to the supply chain strategies, I think it would affect the supply chain strategies. Egypt's supply chain strategies are based off the agriculture, architecture, construction. That's mostly what's going on over there. But the climate could play a big role in some of those industry sectors, because most of those things that I listed are like outside, as far as like agriculture or architecture or construction. Most of those things are like an outside job, like an outside profession that they would do. So the last one would be, I got it from the trade.gov. Egypt is a perfect example of a developing country that is highly vulnerable to climate change and faces numerous threats to its economic, social, and environment sustainability. Like that being said, it's just Egypt, it deals with a lot of climate changes, and they just have a lot of things going on with the weather. So it's just kind of hard for them to just develop, but they are a developing country. It's just they have a very hard time. And I'll now pass it to Maya.
Okay, so with the marketing laws in Egypt, the marketing laws are quite differently than laws in America. So the marketing laws in Egypt are governed by various different media sectors. So you have the investment law, the media law, the prime minister's decree, which turns into the MPFZ, which stands for the Media Public Free Zone, and also the media licensing regulation. So the different key media projects in Egypt operate inside of the Media Public Free Zone. So what the Media Public Free Zone is, it's a certain document that each business or each company would have to and turn in to get approved to freely advertise their content or whatever they need to do in different areas. And with the Media Public Free Zone, it also includes different hotels and buildings and things that the government would approve of, where companies could advertise and do any marketing that they need to. But they had to have that specific form and get approval from that form in order to do whatever marketing that they need to do. So the type of marketing that's included in the MPFZ is radio, television, information broadcasting, e-content production, and of course, just regular marketing. Taxes in Egypt. Egypt is offering different competitive tax rates. So one of the questions that was on the PESTEL analysis guidelines was, would the U.S. have to pay higher taxes in Egypt? And the answer is going to be no, because Egypt has a double taxation treaty signed. So I did a little bit of outside research to see if Egypt had a double taxation treaty signed with the U.S., and they do. So the U.S. would not have to pay higher taxes if they decide to do any trading or anything in Egypt. And going now to robbery and extortion, as Liz Ann explained earlier through her part of the presentation, Egypt has something called a penal code, and you can it includes active and passive bribery of foreign officials. And you would think that these are all criminal offenses, but with further research, the bribery and extortion, the act and the law that Egypt has created, they aren't consistent with that law. They're actually inconsistent. So since they're so inconsistent, all of these are not considered to be a criminal offense in the law of Egypt. Next slide, please. Oh, I'll pass it to my colleague, Leslie.
All right, for international business investment decisions. So basically, the point of this one was to choose two companies that do not have a large international reach in Africa. So the first one I picked was Tyson Foods. So Tyson is the world's second largest processor, marketer of chicken, beef, and pork. So they have international locations in China, Korea, the Asian Pacific, and Europe. Why should they invest in this region, as in Egypt? Tyson is very flexible, which allows them to meet all the needs in the global supply chain that's allowed them to meet every demand. So in Africa alone, they have a few companies that are producers of produce, like with the meats. You have Astro Foods, that's in South Africa. You have Zambeef Products, which is in Zambia. Then we have HMH Rainbow, which is in Uganda, which is in the southeast region, and then the Zambeef products is in the south region as well. So basically, I felt as if Tyson would be a great company to bring in to Africa due to the fact they don't have a produce processor company that's in the northern region to reach all the countries there, as well as when you're going into the Middle East. The country lacks Egypt lacks the effort to have more companies there for reach more people. And then the second one I chose was Apple. As if like a few of my colleagues have talked about, Apple is very renowned, world-renowned company. Apple's the leading technology company in the world. They have a revenue of about $260 billion roughly. So why they should come to Egypt? They will help with the education reforms because Egypt has a lot of reforms going on right now that they want to change a lot of different things that's going on. They also will bring in a lot of jobs and technology in the field. I think the prime minister once had an interview and he said, I think Egypt is a big market and attractive for Apple to exist in directly. Apple has been in Egypt, been through indirect agent suppliers, but we really discussed the idea to have Apple in Egypt to be one of the industrial hubs and a destination for several the whole Middle East region. So they would like to bring in Apple because they know the many opportunities that the company itself will bring, as well as how they will benefit from it. Just due to previous experiences between Egypt and Apple, there have to be set in stone rules that need to be applied, in my opinion, just for the company to work. So this will be the end of our project. Thank you.